Hey, what's going on, everyone? This is Mitch. Good Monday morning to you all. I hope you guys are doing great out there this morning and having a wonderful start to your day and a great beginning to your brand new week out there so far. Here to bring you the latest on Hurricane Milton. The first thing we'll talk about is what's going on with this system right now this morning. We'll go over the latest from the National Hurricane Center. We'll go over all model guidance, the hurricane models, the global models, and all that stuff. And then we'll talk in a lot of detail on impacts. We'll talk about wind. We'll talk about rainfall. We'll speak on the latest forecast as far as storm surge along the west coast of Florida. So this thing will be jam-packed full of information. And then there'll be a portion of the video where we'll kind of geek out with you a little bit, nerd out if you will. And we'll really talk about what's driving such significant intensification with this system. And, this thing's been rapidly intensifying since yesterday morning. And has continued to do so overnight, and I think it will continue to do so today, potentially all the way into tomorrow morning. So we're going to speak on that. Why is it doing this, and why could it potentially weaken before landfall? So we're going to speak on both. So stick with me there if you're interested, and we'll break it all down for you folks. We'll also break down what's going to happen weather-wise across the entire lower 48 for your Monday. So timestamps will be up throughout the entire video. My videos are very, very long, but I like to get very detailed, as you guys may know. If you're a new viewer, well, that might, take you by surprise. Some people prefer like the 8 to 10 minute videos, but folks, there are timestamps up. So definitely just jump ahead to certain portions of the video that you want to pay attention to. So if you guys have not subscribed, certainly consider doing that. Like the video if you like it. And if anybody has anything that I can pray about or pray over, please put it in the comments below so I can do that, and it gives others an opportunity to do so too. I'm very behind on comments. I am very, very behind, but I'll try to get caught up with everything later this afternoon. So let's get rocking and rolling this morning. So let's see what we got. Let's make sure this is going to work for us, and it is. So we're good to go. Not going to use it right now though, but I always like to check to see if it's working. But this is Hurricane Milton, folks. This is a pretty small, compact hurricane. When you compare it to Helene, Helene was much larger right before it made landfall. It was always a very large storm. This is kind of tiny, pretty small. We were expecting this, but we are expecting also for this to grow in size, to really broaden as shear hits this system once it gets closer to Florida. But right now, very tiny hurricane, compact, very strong hurricane. It's a 100-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane as we're waking up this morning. And by the time some of you folks watch this will be even stronger, maybe even a Category 3 major hurricane, which it is forecast to become. Peak intensity actually still a Category 4 145-mile-per-hour hurricane as of right now. So this thing is very healthy. It's pretty much, and it's in an environment of its own, if you will. Nothing's really bothering this thing. A very moist environment, low shear environment. And you can tell it's indicated here by these cold cloud tops surrounding the eye, which is beginning to somewhat clear out now. But you see the whites and areas in pink around the center of this storm, the eye of the storm. This indicates colder cloud tops, which means we have very healthy convection, tall updrafts. The higher up you get in the atmosphere, the colder it gets, and that's indicated by the colors you see on your screen. So this is Hurricane Milton right now this morning with us. The latest cone from the National Hurricane Center. This is the cone that the National Hurricane Center does use. This is just a different way to look at it. It's called Zoom Earth. It's free, available for the public. I've always said this, but it's like combining the tropics with Google Maps. It's a wonderful site to use for the public, I would say. But right now, it is a 100-mile-per-hour Category 2 hurricane. This morning, forecast to become a major hurricane by later this afternoon, 115-mile-per-hour Category 3 storm. And folks, by the time we get into 2 a.m. tonight, Tuesday, it's going to be a 130-mile-per-hour Category 4 hurricane. So forecast to strengthen another 30 miles per hour between now and just 2 a.m. tonight. It's not even 24 hours. Pretty wild to think about. And then by the time we get into 2 p.m. tomorrow afternoon, it's forecast to reach its peak intensity at a 145-mile-per-hour Category 4 storm. Could this reach Category 5 status? Absolutely. The big question, the million-dollar question is this going to make a landfall at its peak intensity? And my question to that right now would be no. And that is, this is reflecting this off the National Hurricane Center cone that it won't, which, it's still 145-mile-per-hour storm by 2 a.m. Wednesday. But check out how this weakens to a 125-mile-per-hour Category 3 storm by Wednesday afternoon. So it does show it weakening, and I'm going to talk about why it does that when we kind of get to the portion of the video where we nerd out with you a little bit. But I will kind of give you a teaser. It's because of wind shear. A lot of westerly flow will be hitting this system, the western side of the system, creating wind shear. Wind shear eats up that shower and storm activity. Convection allows for dry air to get wrapped into the circulation. So that's pretty much what's going to happen with this system right before landfall, maybe a full 24 hours before landfall, maybe even more. And then it'll make landfall sometime Wednesday night now, maybe even into the wee hours of the morning, Thursday morning. And of course, this is where they think it's going to be around 2 a.m. Thursday. Of course, it'll weaken with land interaction. They'll think they'll weaken to a Category 1 hurricane, but this will still be a full-fledged hurricane over central Florida as we're working through the middle of the night, Wednesday night into Thursday morning, folks. Now, is this going to make an actual landfall, at nighttime or right before the sun sets? That's a big question. The timeline is still kind of bouncing back and forth, but this definitely looks like a Wednesday PM sometime at landfall. But that could get backed up into Thursday morning. We got to continue to tweak this and figure this one out. So this is the latest cone. Peak intensity still 145 mile per hour storm. More of your classic kind of smoothed out look from the National Hurricane Center. H stands for hurricane, M for major hurricane. You see the pink here, that's where we have hurricane watches, the yellow tropical storm watches. We're going to zoom into that here in a second. We got hurricane warnings now up for the northern coastline, the Yucatan Peninsula. That tells you how close this is going to get now. So pretty wild stuff. The wind field has broadened, so you see this yellowish orange color here. That is where tropical storm force winds extend out away from the actual center of the storm. We're going to see this really broaden as this storm really expands in size. It just gets larger as it gets closer to Florida. But a closer look at these watches, warnings, and advisories here. That pink color here, that's hurricane watches, and they extend inland. Okay, so obviously Tampa, Sarasota, many areas, all the way down to Fort Myers. Many areas have hurricane watches. Of course, everybody has flood watches too. Even these areas in pink have flood watches. It's just being dominated by the hurricane watch. You can't really overlap the both here, both of these. So these are tropical storm watches. So once again, you folks that got hit by Helene are waking up this morning with tropical alerts, tropical storm watches up, and you got to watch these areas. These hurricane watches could, ooze northward. Okay, tropical storm watches are issued for all the Florida Keys, even some hurricane watches for the far western Florida Keys, and we do have tropical storm watches that are extended inland into southern sections of Florida. So I want to start off by showing you this, and let's see if there's another update here. This is the 5 a.m. update. There'll be another update probably by the time that this video uploads, but it's around 6:20 right now as I'm speaking. There'll be another update in about an hour and a half or so. But this is a 972 millibar low. So just kind of keep that in your head if you can. Maybe write it down. It's a 972 central pressure low. So this is what it's initializing as. It's starting to pick up a little bit of speed, 100 mile per hour storm. Moving at a whopping 8 miles per hour. So it's still pretty slow, but definitely faster than it was. It was going at like 3 miles per hour at one point. So let's go over all the hurricane model guidance that we have. Now, this is from OOZ. 06Z is coming out here in the next hour or so. Could show a little bit something different, if you will. But I think the overall theme here is going to stay the same, and I'll talk about what that means. So I'll tell you right off the dot, all hurricane models are initializing too deep with the actual low pressure. So actual low pressure is 972. You don't always gauge the millibar low off the strength. It definitely can be different. For example, a 972 millibar system with Helene would have probably just made a Category 1 storm. With Milton, it's a 100 mile per hour Category 2 storm. So it's definitely different, okay? So H-Wharf model initializing as a 959 millibar low this morning. So definitely too low, right? Definitely too strong, but let's continue to watch it. It's going to have it intensifying throughout the day. We get into this evening. Drops down to a 943. I mean, that's a Category 3 or 4 hurricane, no doubt. And it continues to intensify somewhat or either stay about the same. We get into about early afternoon Tuesday. It's a 939 Category 4 hurricane. And it doesn't get much stronger after that, it looks like. It looks like it kind of maintains itself through Tuesday night, through Tuesday evening. Wednesday morning, we wake up to a Category 4 hurricane. Okay, now watch what happens. Watch how this number begins to rise eventually. So we're at Wednesday morning at this point, October the 9th. You see how the number begins to rise? That means that the storm is starting to weaken. But look how the storm expands in size. So look how small it is right here, right? Watch how this thing takes up more of your screen as you move into Wednesday afternoon. So the storm, no doubt, is going to broaden. The actual core of the system is going to weaken, though. So I think winds potentially, top end, high end winds can drop, but the wind field will actually expand. Okay, that's the concern here. So we're starting to get into Wednesday afternoon. The H-Wharf model starts to hit the west coast of Florida with some nasty outer bands here. Could be a tornado threat, just like with any hurricane or tropical risk. It always brings some sort of a tornado threat with it. But that millibar begins to steadily drop, and it actually starts to cut into some of this convection as dry air gets wrapped in. And listen, this isn't going to completely limit the impacts, but it could lessen them somewhat. Huge storm surge issue with this is still present. And I do want to note here, it is 2 a.m. at this point, and this thing has not made landfall. It's 2 a.m. Thursday. So we're well past Wednesday p.m. at this point, and has not made landfall. And finally, it does make landfall right as the sun is coming up. Thursday, 8 a.m. is around a 9, what is that? That's like a 956 millibar low. So it weakens pretty substantially from its strongest point. And this makes landfall, and I'm going to pull up my phone, so sorry for the unprofessional look here, but I meant to have my Google Maps pulled up because I wanted to mention a couple town names, city names, and stuff like that. But it looks like this would get closer to, I would say, like Cedar Key. Not quite making an actual landfall there. I believe Cedar Key is right into here. This makes landfall just south of that area. But of course, with the flow of this system going just like this cyclonically, this will push a lot of water into the Tampa Bay area and against all these west coast communities of Florida. So one thing I'll note here, and we'll talk about this a little bit, if this trends a little bit further north or continues kind of these northerly trends, you got to watch out also in southeast Georgia, even a little rain into to the low country of South Carolina. But we could get some nasty outer bands all the way into Tybee Island, the Georgia coastline. It's definitely Jacksonville. So we'll watch that. I know I mentioned that I did not think this was going to get too far north, and I still think that. I'm going to stand by that. But the northern rain shield and some gusty winds could make it as far north as the low country of South Carolina. Absolutely. Especially the coastal regions. So that's the H-Wharf model. What about the H-Mon model? It's initializing a little bit better, but still a little bit too strong. Still about 9 millibars off. But we continue to keep this going. A very small, petite hurricane, very strong and powerful. When we get into Tuesday morning, it's a 942 millibar low. This would make it, no doubt, a Category 4 hurricane at least. And then this continues to gradually strengthen, but not at a crazy pace or anything like that. It just kind of maintains itself, strengthens a little bit. And we start to get into Wednesday morning. It's a 929 millibar low. That's getting close to Category 5 status. And this is moving a little bit quicker. So we're starting to get some outer bands into the Florida coastline at this point. There's Tampa Bay right here. And does this weaken substantially like the H-Wharf model? It does. That millibar begins to rise, which symbolizes a weakening system, but the storm is very large at this point. There, I'll say like the cake is already baked, meaning the damage is already done as far as storm surge. We're already getting so much water being pushed up. It doesn't matter if you have such a weakening storm. I mean, it matters to a degree, but not as much as you would think. Okay, but this is Wednesday afternoon. This is already approaching the Florida coastline. And the H-Mon model makes landfall a full 12 hours before the H-Wharf model. And it has this coming in to like just north of St. Petersburg, the Palm Harbor area, Springfield area, making landfall as a Category 2 or 3 hurricane. I wouldn't be surprised if this makes a landfall as just a Category 2 hurricane. I wouldn't be surprised one bit at all. And so just be careful. I'm sure a lot of people are getting some information twisted up thinking this is going to make landfall as a Category 4 or 5. It's not forecasted to do so, and I really don't think it will. But that's not going to take away the impacts of this. This thing is going to broaden, get very large. But if you notice, the common theme between both of these models is the convection on the south side gets kind of eaten up, if you will. Kind of a dry side, quite literally a dry slot on the southern side. And all the moisture is kind of thrown into the northern side of this system. because dry air is going to be on the western side. We'll talk about this more here in a second. And it gets wrapped in and starts to eat up pretty much the moist environment, the convection. This makes landfall, brings impacts across Florida. Okay. HFA model. Now, the HFA and B model are quite aggressive with the millibar. First off, the millibar is already off. It says it's a 951 right now. It's a 972. But of course, it could be a little stronger. They're continuously getting recon data here from the hurricane hunters. Small petite hurricane drops this all the way to a 907 Category 5 hurricane just north of the Yucatan tomorrow morning. Deepens this all the way to a sub 900 millibar low. I'm just not buying all that. But we're getting into Tuesday evening at just a very small, powerful hurricane. And then that number begins to rise, even on some of the most aggressive models. Look how dramatically this thing begins to weaken as far as millibar pressure here. Makes landfall kind of closer to the HMON model. Timing is a few hours later. But this thing, I mean, loses a lot of steam right before landfall. It weakens. That's been the common theme. Okay, now we look at the HFB model. Still initializing too strong. It says it's going to dramatically strengthen over the next 24 hours, and I could definitely see that happening to a 915 millibar low, Category 5 hurricane. Not sure I could see this getting to Category 5 status, but I just don't think the millibar is going to get this low. But deepens this all the way to a 900 millibar low pressure Category 5 hurricane. And I know I've had a lot of questions like, Mitch, you say millibar way too much, and I probably do. Or, what do you mean by millibar? Well, the lower that millibar is, the stronger the storm system is. And a lot of times with these hurricane models, they like to just overdo this way too much. But it deepens this to that mark, and then we wake up Wednesday morning with an all-out Category 5 hurricane. But once again, you see how that number begins to rise dramatically. I mean, it rises almost 60 to 70 millibars, and then makes landfall, just north of Tampa, right into like the Spring Hill area, Crystal River, Hudson, etc. Okay, and once again, the southern side of the system gets ate up. The convection does because of dry air. So, what is the common thing we're seeing here? Well, it's liking landfall in this area. The hurricane models are right into here, and the timeline seems to be, it looks like around sunset to maybe just after midnight, okay? But the hurricane models like this area right here for it to make landfall, okay? So let's go on and get this back off your screen. That's all the hurricane models. Now what about some of the global models? Okay, it's the latest GFS. Here it comes. It looks like at one point it's going to go, as we're getting into Wednesday, almost due north, but northeast for sure. And this comes up, makes landfall right where the hurricane models are. Okay, kind of makes landfall, I would say, after the sun sets Wednesday night. It looks like a late evening, maybe around midnight, as a Category 2 or 3 hurricane. If we're basing this off the millibar, I would say the global models have somewhat of a better idea with the millibar. Now, I might, some people might have different takes on that, but if we're gauging what the storm is right now at a 972 millibar low, which is a 100 mile per hour hurricane, and what a 964 would be, that would be a major hurricane making landfall just north of Tampa. Okay. Kind of shows the similar thing where, the northern side of the system is worse, and it looks like a lot of the convection gets kind of eaten up on the southern side, but you keep this going, and look how the GFS gets moisture all the way up to the South Carolina coastline. This could bring tropical storm force conditions and definitely some storm surge along the South Carolina coastline. But as far as this jetting inland like Helene, no, it's not going to do that. There's way too much dry air. I want to say this really quick for my folks in the Carolinas. Now, I know this is going to be a little side story. One thing you'll notice Thursday morning, look at this is dew points. Okay, look how much dry air is on the northern side of the system. So, folks, if you get rain along the southeast Georgia coastline, the South Carolina coastline, this is going to be a chilly rain. For example, if the rain shield gets into the low country of South Carolina, this is going to be a wind-driven rain with temperatures in the 50s and low 60s. Pretty wild stuff. And then the temperatures turn around Friday morning and dip down to the 50s and 40s. Pretty wild. That'd be kind of a spooky October type storm, if you will, which they typically are in October. So just want to kind of throw that out there really quick. We'll talk more on that when we get closer. But the European model from overnight, initializing this way too weak, but I do want to just look at it just based off track. And this takes this more right into the Sarasota area. So it's definitely further south in general. And then the Icon model takes this. The Icon model has been kind of further south here. It goes exactly where the Euro goes, and it takes this right into Sarasota, Venice area, and brings a lot of impacts to Lakeland, and then right into Orlando, etc. So yeah, that's the models here. Now taking a look at the 06Z track guidance from the global and hurricane models, and they really are zooming into Tampa, points north or south. You got a couple of them that are going down into the southwestern Florida coastline, but in general, it's around the central western coastline of Florida, which of course is Tampa. So you'll see this, and I've shown this a couple times, folks. This thing is going to peak in intensity here in the next 36 hours or so. Okay, you can see it right here, how the model guidance really peaks right in here. It could peak in the next 48 hours. Some models show that also. But one thing you'll notice is this thing is going to make landfall in 70 to 80 hours or so, give or take several hours. So we go kind of to that mark. You see how the intensity kind of plots here drop? This tells us this will be losing some steam at landfall. But the system is definitely going to broaden. Okay? So, that's interesting. I think that this thing will look its scariest and most intense over the Gulf of Mexico. But anyways, we talk about rainfall, so we're going to get into the impacts now. Of course, a lot of this rain's already fell, fell yesterday. It will continue to fall today. This orange color, that is 8 to 12 inches of rain, Jacksonville. A ton of rain, St. Augustine, just the northeast coastline of Florida. It shows this well, how the northern extent of this system is going to produce the most rainfall. You see, if the system goes like this, then north central northern Florida is going to get the most rain, anywhere from 6 to 8 inches of rain. But it's kind of splotchy throughout Florida. Just know that if you live in Florida, anywhere from 2 to as much as 12 inches of rain is forecasted. So the chance of excessive rainfall, flash flooding. If you live in this red area, that's where you have a 40% chance over the next few days of flash flood guidance being exceeded within 25 miles in any given location. The yellow area is a 15% risk of that. And storm surge. So we got our first storm surge graphic. See if we got any new information, and we don't. They're calling for 8 to 12 feet of storm surge into Tampa Bay. You go up to Yankeetown, you got 5 to 10 feet, and between Yankeetown and the, not going to try to pronounce this river, 3 to 5 feet of storm surge. And I mean, even Charlotte Harbor, folks, same area that got hit by Ian very hard, 5 to 10 feet of storm surge. Okay, so let's hope that this doesn't increase, but I do have a feeling that they will bump up this. They typically do when we get closer. Let's talk about winds. A lot of people want to know about this. So we're going to go over some global model guidance, and then we'll talk about some hurricane models here. So winds. This is the GFS. And I'm like, the GFS gained my respect with the forecast wind totals with Helene because it did so well with the inland extension of the winds into Georgia and South Carolina. It nailed it. So I had to tip my hat to it, so I'm going to show it a little bit more until it kind of loses some of my respect, if you will. But, if we look at predicted wind gusts from the GFS, it wants to bring, and this is wind gusts, not sustained, it wants to bring over 100 mile per hour wind gusts into Tampa Bay. This would bring catastrophic storm surge into the city. So the GFS obviously brings the core of the system up here. So what does that mean? Say if the core of the system goes right up into here, the flow around the actual center of low pressure is going to go like this, right? So what does that mean? Water gets shoved right into Tampa Bay and creates a worst case scenario as far as storm surge, folks. So let's hope that does not happen. But I think storm surge in this case is inevitable. I mean, it's going to happen. But I mean, folks, this brings 80, 90, 95, maybe even 100 mile per hour wind gusts even further inland. I mean, Spring Hill, Ocala, You guys, very strong winds. Orlando, strong winds. Maybe it's just to your, to your west there, west of Orlando. But, where's Ocala? Right here, I believe, kind of up in this area. It wants to bring 80, 90 mile per hour wind gusts into your area. So this is going to pack a punch inland, too, into Florida. Okay, and just to take a broad look here, the winds could be significant around the Jacksonville area, too. Tybee Island, Georgia coastline. And even brings some 40 mile per hour wind gusts into the low country of South Carolina. Look at southeast Georgia. This is the last thing we need to see. So let's hope that this doesn't verify in Georgia. Even 40 to 50 mile per hour wind gusts doesn't seem like a lot, but you guys are trying to clean up. I mean, power hasn't even been fully restored in Georgia in many areas right now. And let's hope that, somebody's going to get hit regardless, unfortunately. So, Georgia, the European model run here, not as strong winds up here in Georgia and South Carolina. So let's go on and just get a little bit closer to Florida. This is another terrible scenario for Tampa. It brings the core of the wind field right into Tampa. It wants to hit Tampa with 90 to almost 100 mile per hour wind gusts, folks. And it brings the actual core of the wind field just south. So this would bring stronger winds into Orlando, Lakeland, Spring Hill will still get some nasty winds, and just all the higher populated areas right here in central Florida. I mean, Disney World, SeaWorld would get hit hard with something like this, and just a little bit of an enhancement on the east coast of Florida too. So I mean, I can mention, Daytona Beach, Jacksonville, all the way down to Melbourne. You guys, St. Augustine, you guys are going to get hit hard by some tropical storm force wind gusts at minimum. But the core of this system moves right into here, right into Tampa Bay based off the Euro. So let's go over, some hurricane models here. So this is the HFA model. This is predicted wind gust. Here comes the system Wednesday. We're getting into Wednesday evening, and then we're starting to get into like Wednesday night at this point. Okay, the HFA model is bringing 90 to over 100 mile per hour wind gusts right into Tampa Bay. So this is the actual center of the storm, right, based off this model right here. So the flow around Milton is going just like this. Okay, so what is that doing? The flow, the cyclonic flow, is pushing all that water, because the winds are coming right into the bay, into Tampa Bay, creating that 8 to 12, maybe even more catastrophic storm surge right into the Tampa Bay area. Okay, worst case scenario. And I'll be honest, we're waking up to model guidance showing the track looking like it could potentially be a little bit far south. If this thing goes far north, this thing goes kind of far south here, then of course you're going to get still water shoved into the bay as this thing's approaching. But as it makes landfall, you could get an offshore flow that's helping to push water out the area. And then the storm surge would be worse for, say, the Charlotte Harbor. So obviously, who's going to get it worse, Tampa Bay or Charlotte Harbor? I think that's a big question here. Or does it take so far of a north track that, the storm surge isn't bad for these bay areas down here and worse further to the north? That's a big question here. So you keep going here. And of course, strong gusty winds all the way into North Florida. Let's hope this does not verify for these areas that just got slammed by Helene. But 50, 60 mile per hour wind gusts based off this model. I don't know if I'm buying that strong of winds this far north, but we'll have to see, and we will take a look at, say, another hurricane model here. Let's just look at the H-Wharf model, which isn't going to show wind gusts. It's going to probably just show wind speeds. Yeah. So this is a little bit further north. Of course, we're still getting the flow going right into Tampa Bay. But the worst of it looks to be just to your north. This will bring the core of the system kind of closer to Cedar Key. But still we get a lot of storm surge right into Tampa Bay. And check it out. You see, one thing you got to watch here too is storm surge also into the Georgia coastline, because the cyclonic flow, is going just like this, right? And then it comes up like this. And you're getting a lot of water getting pushed up against the Georgia coastline too. So you're going to get storm surge. Even to the northeast Florida and Georgia coastline before this thing fully kind of moves over your head in these regions. So you keep going, and you're going to get this northeastern flow right up against the South Carolina and Georgia coastline here too. So if something like this happens as we're getting into Thursday evening, we could have some serious high tide issues and low tide issues even, and just flat out storm surge along the northeast of Florida, Georgia, and South Carolina coastline also. It's just something to watch if this ticks ever so slightly further to the north. Okay, so winds are serious, guys. Very serious. And, if you look at the National Weather Service forecast for winds, it wants to bring the core of the wind south of Tampa, right into, say, the Sarasota, Bradenton area, Venice. It wants to bring those 90 to 100, 110 mile per hour wind gusts right into this area. This would bring a lot of storm surge into Tampa Bay also, and a lot of storm surge into Charlotte Harbor. It would kind of split the gap between both. But once this system makes landfall, if it was to make a landfall right here, then it will be pushing water out the Bay Area, but it's still going to push water into the Bay Area beforehand. So a lot of model guidance has this going further north, guys, like up here or right here. Heck, even up here in some. But the National Weather Service forecast, it's kind of like, what we talked about with Helene. Is stuck on this further south, and I'm not going to start a debate here, but they are stuck on this further south, kind of like they were stuck on it further west with Helene. I'll just leave it at that. I'll let y'all bicker about that in the comments. So I'm not going to start that. Social media got very riled up about that, and I did too. I just kept it a little bit more internal. But talking about the environment background of this system, listen, the reason this thing is exploding in intensification right now is because the upper wind pattern is supportive of it. So this is winds 35, 40,000 feet up in the air. And right now, the upper wind pattern supports explosive development. A low shear environment, you're getting a lot of air being pushed out away from the system. So we're going to draw on this a little bit. This is the system this morning. The millibar is off, but don't focus too much on that. This system is spinning like this. Okay, cyclonically in the low to mid levels. But in the upper levels, air is actually getting pushed out away from the system just like that. Okay, you can see the lines with the arrows embedded into them. Even right here, air is being pushed out away. It gets a little weird in certain areas, but in general, there's either very light flow aloft meaning in the upper levels, or there's flow that is supporting air being dispersed outward. So the further you get air being pushed outward, it allows for more air to rise. That gets dispersed outward, allowing for more air to rise. Rising air allows for convection, shower and storm activity. Shower and storm activity allows for a moist environment. And these tropical systems love a moist environment. They don't like dry air. Now, one thing you're noticing here is on top of the system, let's get all this off here, a lot of westerly flow. And I mean, it's moving pretty quick too at about 50, 60 knots. Okay, almost interstate speed. Now, as this system moves kind of more so into this territory, it's going to run into that westerly flow aloft. So watch what happens behind the storm as we move this forward, okay? We keep going. This thing starts to gain a little bit of latitude right here. Still a lot of air being dispersed out away from the storm to the north, the northeast, and the east. But kind of watch as the millibar number begins to rise right into here, okay? Which means it's weakening. Why does it do that? Well, still a healthy environment on the northern side of the system right here. A lot of air being dispersed out. That's good for the tropical system here. But on the western side of the system, you're getting this westerly flow that's going right up against Milton now. Okay, so this is interfering with the cyclonic flow of the system. So this is eating up, the shear is eating up a lot of convection on the western, southwestern, and southern side of the system. So when it starts to eat up that moist environment, the convection, dry air begins to interfere in the cyclonic flow of the system. That weakens the system because the actual center of low pressure really needs a moist environment to really intensify, to really take advantage of all the factors in the atmosphere. If y'all hear my cat crying, I do apologize. For you new viewers, this is more of a personal channel. I have a cat named Rocket that absolutely gets so upset when I close the door on it. So if you hear me out in the background, it's just my cat Rocket. Little side story. For my normal viewers are like, yeah, that's a normal thing here. But a lot of westerly flow hitting the western side of the system, eating up the convection and just really messing up the western and southern side of this system. So you keep this going here, and that's why it just weakens all the way up to landfall. In fact, you take it all the way into Thursday morning on this particular hurricane model run. I mean, you got flow just slamming right into the system, going right through it now, just really messing with it. So you can really see this here as we switch to the moisture at the mid-levels. If we take a closer look at this, this is for this evening. This is surrounded by very moist air. I mean, it's such a healthy hurricane. You can actually see this dry spot for the eye of the hurricane. You see that little brown area? That is dry air. You keep this going. We're going into to Tuesday morning. Very healthy hurricane. We're getting into Tuesday evening. Very, very healthy hurricane. But one thing you'll notice here, you see how dry air is starting to wrap fully around the outer edges of the system? Okay, it's starting to creep closer. So, yes, this does have a very compact, moist environment, which is really protecting it. It's such a strong hurricane. It's going to really take a big punch of dry air to mess with it. But eventually, as we continue to move forward, look, we're getting into Wednesday early afternoon. You see the dry air, kind of drier air on the southern side of the system. And then we start to get all the way to right here. Let's stop it right here. This is around the middle of the night, Wednesday night. A lot of moist air still on this side of the system, which makes sense because you got a lot of rising air out away from the system. Okay, but look at the moist air. I'm sorry, the dry air getting really wrapped into the system. It's not near as green right in here anymore. So this is eating up the convection. Dry air is starting to get into the system. And these tropical systems do not want anything to do with dry air. So that's why it weakens. Shear hits the system to the west. It basically knocks down the barrier of the western and southern side of the system. When it knocks down that barrier, dry air is able to filter in and invade the system. Hope that makes sense. If it doesn't, we'll try it again this evening. So let's break down what's happening weather-wise across the entire country. And we'll go through this pretty quick because it's a pretty quiet day. But I do want to be excited for everybody. There's a cold front sweeping across the country. In fact, it's already moved across a lot of these areas. Here's the cold front right here. And the numbers you see on your screen are actually dew points, not temperatures, dew points. That'd be quite chilly for this time of the year. But you can see dry air has moved into Nashville, Kentucky, points north. Dry air is moving to Oklahoma. This cold front's on the doorstep of you folks in Dallas. It's starting to move into like Alabama, Mississippi. But you're waking up to, I mean, the dew points aren't that bad even ahead of this cold front, just in the 50s. But it is tropical once you get further south along the Gulf Coast. We got a lot of moisture out ahead of this system in the northeast. With a low riding the boundary. You can see the low pressure right here. No low pressures riding this boundary further south. You know, it's wild. We have not had rain since, at least in my neck of the woods, since Helene. And I don't know if we're going to have rain anytime soon. It's been a weird pattern here in the southeast where the only way we can get rain is from tropical systems. I don't know what's up with that. But as far as watches, warnings, and advisories, still continues to be hot with these heat alerts across the southwest. And of course, we've already talked about the tropical threats and flood watches for Florida. Everybody else, though, it looks pretty nice for today. Now, there is a risk of flash flooding today for Florida. We've talked about that too. The further south you get into Florida, the higher that risk gets. So there is a moderate risk for Miami-Dade area. Okay. And then the risk of severe weather, there is none. Just a risk of some thunderstorms along this cold front boundary and ahead of it. So if you live in the green area, you run a risk of a thunderstorm today. But some areas, not even a high risk. As far as moisture, Florida will pretty much take the cake today. As far as the only action we get into this afternoon, shower and storm activity continues. The further south you get into Florida, the more heavier and more thunderstorm activity you get into this evening. Look at all those thunderstorms in South Florida. And then we wake up tomorrow morning and we'll likely do it again. This is like kind of a weak low pressure out ahead of the main low pressure, which is Milton, that has caused all this kind of pre-rain event, if you will, action. So rainfall between now and the next 24 hours, Miami could get 3 to 4 inches of rain, folks. A little bit of rain up into Tampa, but not much. This is really mainly for the east coast of Florida and then southern Florida. All right. This morning, ahead of this cold front, we're getting some rain sweeping through New England. This, will continue to be around through this afternoon. We'll get some on and off showers. Definitely a fall-like day. Some showers could continue overnight, and then we're going to get a wave of energy associated with kind of the upper low with the cold front. And this will bring some shower activity, maybe even some lake effect activity In fact, it looks like it is kind of lake enhanced off Lake Huron into Lake Ontario as we're getting into tomorrow morning. Look at the blue creeping up on your screen. You're getting closer to that time of the year for sure. So South Central U.S., quiet weather. Nothing to speak on whatsoever. Sorry to only give you about 7 seconds there, but it continues to be quiet across the South Central U.S. North Central U.S., beautiful weather. A little bit of shower activity is possible in the eastern UP of Michigan area. And we'll wake up tomorrow morning and kind of the same action. A little bit of action here maybe in eastern UP. But look at the snow up here in Canada. Love to see it. I do. The western U.S., quiet. Nothing's going on. Tall ridge. So all the weather is pretty much shunted off to the north. So quiet weather expected. Temperatures, doesn't take a rocket scientist to see where that cold front is, does it? You know, you can see it right here. Once you get south of the boundary, you know, still hanging on to that warm, moist air, 80s, even some 90s. But for a lot of these areas, this will be your last warm day for the foreseeable future. Cold, cloudy, fall-like conditions in Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire. Must be nice. Look at the cold air up here in Quebec and Ontario. And look at these nice temperatures across the middle of the country right here. So temperatures out west are starting to warm up pretty much everywhere, even up into Montana. It's starting to get warmer. So, yeah, that's all I got, guys. Thank y'all for tuning in. Man, that's a 41-minute video, folks. It's been a while since we've done one that long, but a lot to talk about. God bless all y'all. Have a wonderful day, and I'll talk to you again soon.